And in medicine, right, there's the Hippocratic Oath where if you're sick, you must be served, right? That's the oath all physicians take. And as a result, if I'm sick and the cure exists, I expect to get it. And if I'm sick and the cure doesn't exist, then I hope for research and development to create a breakthrough. And that's the same thing people project on recycling. But it's not the case at all, right? All recycling in the world is carried out by for-profit garbage companies. Like I heard you have Waste Management coming to speak to you. That's an example of a for-profit garbage company. And this is the crazy part. There is no Hippocratic Oath. In fact, there is no law anywhere in the world that says a recycling company must recycle anything it collects.
Wow.
Right? No law forcing that whatsoever. Doesn't mean recycling is broken. It just means it is not a benevolent public service. And so what ends up getting recycled is simply what a garbage company can make money on. It's urban mining for value. That is all it is. And that's defined by this equation. The garbage company, which may be multiple companies, mind you, but the system, if you will, has the cost of collecting the waste and processing it, basically getting it from you and turning it into a sellable output. And if the sellable output is worth more than those costs, it's going to get recycled. And if it's worth less than those costs, it will get disposed. And so why is a cardboard box special? It's because it's profitable to recycle. Why is an aluminum can special? It's because it's profitable to recycle. And why is, and this is the crazy part, 95% of objects not recyclable is not because they can't be. It's because they cost more to collect and process than the results are worth. And so you get a Venn diagram that looks like this. Just note the orange circle is actually 95%, and the green circle is 5%, right? It just would be hard to draw it in that exact ratio here. And this is actually getting worse, not better. That's why today, the amount of garbage we make per capita goes up every year. And the percent of that that gets recycled actually goes down every year. And the reason it's getting worse is because what's the biggest megatrend in object design? Whether you're designing, shoes or packages, the biggest megatrend is cost reduction. Everything is cheaper tomorrow than today. And think about any object in your life, whether it's a board game or a piece of clothing or a package, that is the case. And as you remove value out of goods by cheapening them, they become intrinsically less recyclable. And that is the overall issue. It's why, for example, compostable packaging doesn't actually get composted anywhere. It certainly technically is compostable and it will degrade, but the actual composters who receive it hate it because it hurts their economics. So they sort it out and dispose it. They don't actually compost it. Just to sort of, peel this onion a little bit more for you, here's two waste streams, right? Both may look similar in a way. They're both made from aluminum, but one is profitable to recycle. If you're going to collect enough aluminum cans to have 15 cents of aluminum value, you will have probably spent 7 cents of collection cost and 3 cents of processing cost, and will make a profit of 5 cents. The coffee capsule, to collect 15 cents of aluminum value, that's the only thing of value in a coffee capsule, the rest of it is wet coffee on the inside, costs about $10 to collect and about $5 to process. So that net cost becomes, well, $15 minus 15 cents or $14.85. And a coffee capsule will never be profitable to recycle because what's Nestle thinking behind the scenes? How do I have less aluminum in it tomorrow than today, right? So it's more affordable and more profitable. So once we realized that, we were able to discover sort of how do you solve then for the things that are not recyclable, because it's only about the economics. And this became the business equation that has become the underpinning of TerraCycle overall. We charge a stakeholder, whoever's willing to fund it, whatever it costs to collect the waste, that's the most economically dynamic bucket, then what it costs to process the waste, minus what the results are worth. And the secret sauce to how we've had a business only grow for 25 years is we've realized that even if you have the equation, companies are built, like the answer astutely said, to maximize profit for shareholders. So they generally view sustainability as a risk, right? A risk to be managed. And so it's going to be very little funding that is attributed to sustainability. And especially in today's type of political environment, even less so, because companies really feel sort of let off the hook, if you will, from a enforcement or regulation point of view around environmental policy. So the secret sauce is then you have to drive more value for these companies, ROI, than cost. And if you do so, then anything can get recycled at scale. And let me show you what I mean by that. Here's how 50 million plants were recently packaged at Walmart, and this would be in used margarine containers. That would be an example of more reuse or upcycling. Or here's how we make a jacket for a comedian. But the vast
Yeah.
majority of these are turned into plastic parts for shipping vehicles and so on. We've recently recycled 1 billion cigarette butts where the ash tobacco paper is shredded, composted, and then the filter, which is made from a polymer, is turned into the type of plastic objects you see there. And that's collected in cities that look something like this. So whether it's recycling flip-flops into playgrounds, PPE, we're the world's largest recycler of, masks and gloves, all the way to dirty diaper recycling, which is live. This is Holland. It's quite literally a shit show of a project, but that's in Japan, Holland, and France. Whether it's blister pack recycling in the UK, or contact lens recycling in the US, or guitar string recycling in North America. I mean, you name it, whether it's recycling credit cards, all the way to baby car seats, doesn't matter. The answer to how do we recycle is only one of two things. Either there has to be value in the object enough that it is worth picking it up and processing it, or the money has to be infused in the system and funded. Recycling car seats will never make economic sense on their own, so a stakeholder needs to fund it. It could be the car seat manufacturer, maybe to hope that you will prefer their brand over someone else's. It could be a retailer like here, Target, doing it so that you shop at their store instead of Walmart. Those are voluntary examples. It could also be done mandatorily from a regulatory standpoint, but there's just very low global appetite to really embed the true costs of all this into the products. One day, maybe, but at least not today. And that gives sort of the first part of what we realize, which is how do we start bending the circle a little bit and get things recycled? The next question was then, okay, this is not a full circle. How do we then get companies to integrate waste back into their product? And why don't they make their products from waste and be a real demand engine? And here we found another very different white elephant in the room by sort of taking a step back. And that is, there's this interesting phenomenon in recycled content. Have you noticed that if you buy a backpack or a t-shirt or whatever, a shampoo bottle, and it says it's made from recycled plastic, it's always coming from beverage containers? It's not, bags into bags or t-shirts into t-shirts or shampoo bottles into shampoo bottles. It's literally soda bottles always into these other things. And the reason that's the case is we design our products from a virgin mentality. That is to say that we design them based on what virgin materials can do in all characteristics, whether it's price and performance. And only beverage containers that are, only waste beverage containers behave that way, right? Only used soda bottles have the same performance and price when recycled as normal virgin materials. Everything else deviates from that point. And this is a huge, massive issue because unless we solve this, we can never really have a circular economy at scale. Because if everyone makes their stuff from soda bottles, there's no way to create a full circle. And this is why even Coke and Pepsi are struggling to create 100% recycled content bottles in many countries, because there's not enough of their own waste stream to go around, because there's so much other demand for that exact same material. So in our second division, what we really think about is how do we get companies to integrate waste back into their system? The holy grail, of course, is going to fully closed loop solutions. Like this here is the world's first pen from used pens. Here, this is in Japan. We collect pens, we deconstruct them, make them into new plastic, and it goes right back, in this example, to Pilot Pens, who makes a new pen from it. The entire pen component that is in sort of black plastic is all used pens. Well, here's another example with ASIC shoes, where this shoe is collected back and made into itself. And the big lesson on closed loop design is there's sort of two types of closed loop. There's what I call open closed loop, like the pen, which is any pen can go into this and then make that new Pilot pen. Those are the real scalable closed loop solutions. Or what we call closed loop, like the shoe, where only this shoe can go back into itself. It's not any shoe is turned into this shoe. It is this shoe can be recycled into itself, which is really cool, but it's a much more narrow solution. And the real foundational question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we constantly use waste as a raw material and design from a waste point of view, not a virgin point of view? And that gets us to a pretty big circle for recycling. And about, what is it now? Maybe about 8 years ago, we started thinking about, well, is recycling really the solution to waste? We've constantly sort of kept challenging ourselves on this point, and we realized it's not, right? Recycling is a really good solution to the symptom of waste, sort of like taking a Tylenol if you have a headache, but it's not solving waste at the root cause. And as we explored that, we were thinking, well, what is the root cause of waste? And where we squarely landed on was disposability. Disposability is what really came on in the 1950s. It's why none of you have ever darned a sock or even know what that means, right? It's why we live in the world we live today. And remember, what's the virtue of disposability? It's convenience. But if we can somehow solve for disposability, we can greatly tighten the circle and move from a recycling-based circular economy where all we are recovering is the raw material an object is made from, to a reuse-based circular economy where we are valorizing every aspect of that object, what it's made from, the form it's in, and even the intention of the object. So about 8 years ago, we started a division called Loop. And our big insight at the beginning was, wait, back in the 1950s and before, when we did darn our socks and cobble our shoes, our milk came from a milkman, so did our motor oil. Many things came in reusable packaging. And what's really interesting from a business point of view is that package is an asset. And so the company, the dairy, is very motivated to make sure it lasts because the more it lasts, the more it depreciates and effectively takes down their cost per fill. And what happened? In the 1950s, when disposability came along, and by the way, this is a positive photo from the 1950s celebrating the virtues of disposability, which is unbelievable convenience, right? No more doing the dishes, just throw them away. But a very odd thing happened. Packages moved to becoming not an asset of the manufacturer, but an asset of the consumer. Is there anyone here who wants to own their candy wrapper when there's no candy inside, or their shampoo bottle when there's no shampoo inside? Isn't it odd that we own all this stuff, yet we don't want to own it? And then it becomes a cog or a cost of goods sold to the manufacturer. And so is born the big mega trend of reducing costs or removing value. And that's what then progressively makes things less recyclable every day than the day before. But let's remember that unbelievable convenience that it brings about. So our hypothesis in this division was, how do we maintain the convenience of single use without the waste, without the negative? And the first thing that really seduced us, and frankly, over 200 other major CPG companies, we got, most of the world's biggest companies to sign on, from Nestle, Unilever, Mars, P&G, you name it, was that if we go back to this old way of looking at things and packages become an asset, you can massively upgrade the package. This became what Nestle's products look like in our Loop ecosystem. Or this is Tide in Loop. I mean, isn't that the most beautiful version of Tide you've ever seen? Or this is Clorox wipes. This is Haagen-Dazs ice cream. I mean, isn't that the nicest ice cream package in the world? Cascade dish soap, you name it. And we were like, okay, we got something really exciting. 200 consumer good companies got really, and started making these incredible versions of their products because, again, we can move the package to be an asset. And what we thought we needed is a platform where these products can be available anywhere. You can buy them anywhere. Like you can buy your Coca-Cola at Walmart and then drop it off at Target. Then you can buy your whatever at Target and drop it off someone else. A buy anywhere, return anywhere ecosystem. Basically one where all the products now come in reusable packaging. You just pay a deposit when you access them. Then when you're done, dirty, no cleaning, no sorting, you throw them away into a bin. And then we, as the waste management function, collect it, sort it, clean it, and it goes back to the manufacturer who refilled it. And so very famously in 2019, we got the CEOs of P&G, PepsiCo. I also got the CEO of Greenpeace, all of them on the same stage together. We launched Loop, and it became the number one most talked about sustainability story 6 years ago. And then we started going to retailers and said, look, let's get this out there all over the world. So we partnered with the number one retailers in Canada, Loblaw, US, Walmart, France, Carrefour, UK, Tesco, Japan, Eon. This is like the number one retailer in every one of these markets, and said, let's have you guys play ball. And what they first said was, look, we need to make sure our consumer actually cares. So we solved that by launching e-commerce websites under the look and feel of these famous retailers, and put these products out there in 5 countries. And it worked. And the big insight, by the way, was you couldn't tell the difference between a Japanese consumer behavior to an American consumer behavior. Everyone used it. It worked. Then we told the retailers, look, let's stop this e-com thing because it's very expensive for us to run these pilots, and let's go in store. And so all the retailers did. And this is what it looked like all over the world. And we had a really interesting turning point here. By the way, at this point, we're about $40 million into this particular division. So we're also, really invested. And then we said to the retailers, this is working. Awesome. Can we now scale? And the retailers, everywhere except France, said no. And they said no because we forgot a foundational truth. It's to the question that I asked at the very beginning, where what is the purpose of business? It's to maximize profit to shareholders. And how does water flow? Sort of downhill. And in the world of business, it flows towards how do I make the most amount of money doing the least amount of effort? That is the natural way decisions flow, period. And what's so amazing about disposable linear consumption is that it's really easy to be profitable. And when you come in and say, let's make all your packaging reusable, you are increasing complexity because at minimum, you have to have muscles for the fact that this package was out in the world before it came back to be filled again. And you're not creating incrementality. If you're a shampoo company where you want to spend your money is inventing conditioner, or if you're a toothpaste company where you want to spend your money is inventing mouthwash, if you're laundry detergent, you want to invent fabric softener, and so on and so on. And so why did it succeed in France? And today it's the largest reuse ecosystem in France in hundreds and hundreds of stores with over 400 different products shipping in fully reusable packaging because of regulation. In France, there's laws that are now mandating reuse as well as subsidizing it. And this was a huge lesson I learned in sustainability very painfully, was that there are certain things we can do, which if they can demonstrate, immediate profitability, like the examples we've done on recycling, then they can be enacted voluntarily. That would be like me telling you guys to turn off your lights, if you're not in the room. You'll save money and you'll save the environment. But hard sustainability, which is sacrifice, is the role of laws and regulations. That's also what's sort of unfortunate of what's happening in our country at the moment. Hopefully, this will shift, but that is the real rule of, sort of forcing companies to do the right thing. And it's proven, and in France it works. And the beauty of reuse is when it goes to scale, it actually becomes cheaper. And I'll close on this before I go to your questions. Just because it's late, I'm going to give you a whiskey example. This is a what they call an opening price point Scotch whiskey. I don't know if you guys drink this stuff, William Peel, but opening price point just means it's a cheap Scotch whiskey. And this one sells at €12.49. That's the disposable bottle. The reusable bottle, which actually looks really similar, but when you're done, it gets cleaned and refilled. Look at that. It sells for €11.80 with a 50-cent deposit. So when you buy it, you've saved 16 cents or 19 cents, excuse me. And when you return it, you've saved 69 cents. Why? Because collecting and cleaning that bottle is cheaper than making a new one. And that is foundationally the magic of reuse. And not to mention, there is no waste. That bottle goes around 20, 30 times. And when it one day breaks, it just gets recycled right back into itself. So hopefully that gives you a little taste of the type of stuff we do. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about your non-profit side. Is there a secret sauce for that too? Like, how different is like?
Sorry, you asked about, I just missed what you were asking. You said nonprofit?
Yeah, I wanted to ask more about your nonprofit
Ah.
side. Is there a secret sauce for that too, or a different formula? Like how?
Yeah, so God, it's a good question. So there isn't. It's much harder, is the punchline, right? And maybe first why we did a nonprofit. So you'll notice all the countries we operate in, like North America, Europe, Oceania, Japan, Korea, are rich countries. And that is because hopefully the biggest lesson you've taken away from this is that circular economy is an expense, right? There's no magic sauce to suddenly make things circular. It's all about either the object has money or you fund the circularity. So either it's impregnated in the object or it is added to the object. There's no other way to make it work. It's all about the money, and that's the virtue of rich countries. I come from a poor country, Hungary, right? It's not on this map. I can't make it work. And we realize that poor countries cannot self-finance, so you need external funding, which is why we started the TerraCycle Foundation, which is a US public charity, and basically it attracts funding from rich countries. And then we're able to deploy it in emerging countries, and we just happen to do Thailand first. And the work we do there looks, just to give you a better visual, something like this. We have a whole fleet of river cleanup devices in Bangkok, and we run the city's biggest river cleanup apparatus. But this is funded by foreign dollars. Now, you asked about a secret sauce. It's the same sort of thing. As I said in the first business, like in the core business unit, the only challenge that makes nonprofits harder, which is if you're going to start a mission-driven business, I would always recommend to start it as a for-profit, is for every $1,000 invested into for-profits, people invest $1 into nonprofits. It's 1,000 to 1 funding ratio. Governance is harder on a nonprofit than a for-profit. Everything is harder on a nonprofit than a for-profit. The only virtue of a nonprofit is you can attract a different source of funding, right? And that's what we needed to deploy to be able to work in Thailand. But it is much harder to scale it and maintain it than the for-profit is. So it's hard. It's just harder. There's no question. It just attracts different funding sources.
Hi, hope you can also hear me.
Yes.
Cool. So you mentioned that the costs in France on the reuse products for lube
Yes.
were lower. Is that because of actual production costs going down, or does that also come from the regulations surrounding it and some level of funding or subsidy from the government?
The answer is yes to both. So in the short, let me answer it both ways. One, on the role of the regulation and the subsidies, and the second is empirically without the subsidies. So yes, in the short term, there are subsidies that help support it. But as the system scales, those subsidies go down because they're less necessary. So they're only really important when the system is embryonic and it's competing against a very well-established system, which is today's supply chain of disposable packages. So that's on the subsidy side. As it pertains to the empirical side, imagine a spectrum for a moment. Like my two fingers are on two ends of the spectrum. On this end of the spectrum are packages that are the most expensive per kilo or per liter of content they package. Those would be things like perfume bottles, wine bottles, scotch bottles, things, laundry detergent, pouring vessels and such. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the cheapest way to package a kilo or a liter of content. That would be things like flexible film. Think like the bag potatoes come in, or the bag pet food comes in, and so on and so forth. Then divide that spectrum into thirds. And let's go with the expensive third first. In the expensive third, so packages that look like this, reuse is really fun and pragmatic because you don't have to change the package. Wine bottles are massively over-designed to be used once. It's sort of insane that these are disposable, right? They're way over-designed. Well, but so is a jar of baby food or a bottle of tomato ketchup or whatever. These packages are now conducive to reuse because they're so durable they could just be cleaned and refilled. That is that bottom third of more expensive packaging, your hot sauce container, your perfume container, and so on. And those are empirically cheaper to reuse than to make new. And reuse works brilliantly from an environmental and economic purpose at scale, unsubsidized. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, a candy wrapper, or a chip bag or a bag of pet food is never going to be better in reuse. It's always going to be more expensive, and it will always be worse for the environment, right? You will never get a break even no matter how many times you reuse it, because just the cost of collecting and cleaning it is going to be more economically and environmentally expensive than making it new. So it's important to say reuse is not a silver bullet, right? And that middle third, by the way, it's a coin toss. It just depends on the details of the package, right? On its nuances. The only silver bullet, by the way, is not buying things. And that is an important sort of takeaway, is that, there's no way to make our level of consumption okay, right? There just isn't. And we're going to have to reckon with that at some point in time.
So I have a follow-up on that then.
Yes.
So if it is cost effective or more efficient, reduced costs on the more expensive products, is the only thing keeping it from, well, I guess the answer is probably no, but what is keeping it from succeeding outside of the regulation in the long run, in countries where the subsidies will eventually come down?
Yeah, it's the world's, it's a wonderful example of a prisoner's dilemma problem, right? And so the issue is, is that it's more expensive until you get to scale. And scale is, let's say, like a few thousand stores. Okay. So when we were running these pilots, which is a pilot's like half a dozen to a dozen stores, the brands could supply, right? They would make it in their R&D settings and it would be worthwhile because, they're getting learnings and so on. And then they modeled it and they said, we can't then supply until you're at a few thousand stores. So there's this huge gap between like 5 stores and a few thousand stores because it doesn't make economic sense between those two issues. And we couldn't scale up through that sort of, canyon without the regulatory force that sort of forces the hands of the players to just deal with it, and the subsidy that makes it a bit more bearable to deal with it.
Thank you.
Right? And let's remember the problem innately is corporations and how they look at regulation, right? Generally, what corporates try to do in a regulatory system is to kill the regulation, and if not, own the regulation, right? And control it. And what we found in reuse is sort of you get, when there's pressure on corporates to look at reuse, they fall into what I sort of coined the triangle of stagnation, which is a triangle with 3 points. And they just live in this triangle, which is they make future commitments. Here's my pledge for 2030, 2040, 2050. Then they create multi-stakeholder pre-competitive dialogues. That's just a lot of blah, blah, blah that doesn't go anywhere. And then they launch pilots that also don't go anywhere. And then they rotate that every 5 years because that's how long anyone stays in that role. And then by the time a new person's in, they just repeat the merry-go-round again, right? And they stay there because it's trying to get water to flow uphill, right? It is adding complexity without incrementality. And that is the challenge of any real profound sustainability, thing that is not in the short term conducive to profit maximization. Yes.
Hi, Tom. My name is Nadia. I'm from Indonesia. So I'm curious, why did you start doing it for emerging countries in Thailand, where maybe you know that Indonesia is one of the biggest, like having landfill in Southeast Asia, also one of the biggest dumpster market from these developed countries dumping their, throwing their garbage. And second, I'm also interested how TerraCycle developed the technology, because the most costly part is actually sorting, sorting the waste from the dirty to the one that you can actually recycle. How did you do it? And like, what's your plan in the future for these emerging countries? Because the trend is, the waste will, after China ban the import of trash, and now many of emerging countries import, getting export from the developed countries. Yeah, I mean the future market is in the emerging countries, and you cannot have this NGO model forever.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right on everything you say. So let me maybe take your questions backward, right? So you're absolutely correct, right? I want to preface, because the gentleman who asked earlier, like, what's the secret sauce of NGOs? There is no secret sauce. It's why NGOs are small and they're difficult, and there's no sort of foundational secret to unravel that. The problem for circular economy is that it is only about the money flow. I want to be so crazy clear. It's not like a technology can solve the innate economics, right? Inherent in waste. Let me paint you just a clear example of what do I mean by this, right? Imagine that right in front of you appeared a cup, okay? And my hope is that you're going to take that cup, and let's say it's very dirty, clean it, and drink from it, right? Let's say that's my hope, but I have no way to force you to do that, okay? I think there's only 2 ways I can get you to voluntarily do that. Either the cup has to be so valuable that you're super happy to take it. What if it's made from gold and has diamonds on it and is, a valuable cup? Then I'm sure you'd say, wonderful, I'll certainly clean it and enjoy it, and I'll take another and another if it were to appear. But what if it was a, plastic solo cup, right? That's also gross and nasty and whatnot. I think the only way I can get you to pick it up is to pay you. And at some amount of money, you'll say, okay. So it's so important to center is that it's on the money flow, right? That is the absolute everything. It's why waste ends up in emerging countries, and it's also why there's very little resource to solve it. And the other problem is in countries like Indonesia and Thailand and others, that packaging has become so much more cheap that it's even less valuable to bother collecting and recycling, right? In emerging countries, shampoo doesn't come in bottles, which has value, but comes in single-serve sachets, right? Which has like no value. Even the waste pickers don't want to pick it up because there's no economic purpose to picking it up. And so this is a massive foundational issue overall. We picked Thailand, to answer your first question, because that's where the money said they wanted to go. Our first funders were foundations like the Coca-Cola Foundation, the PepsiCo Foundation, the Bentley Foundation, the Audi Foundation. And these, all the way from consumer product companies to automotive companies, they picked Thailand. So that's where we go. That was the answer. I couldn't really influence it. But there's only so much money that, these sort of groups are going to give. And by the way, in the type of political environment we're in, that's even harder now than easier. The funding to nonprofits has become so bad in the past year with the demolishment of US aid and all these other sort of negative, effects on it. So, and the sorting, as you asked the question, part of it's done by humans, part of it's done by machines. But there's no sort of magic solution to suddenly make sorting super cheap, right? It's just about finding the right process in the market that you're in on how do you sort the waste to try to get the most value for it. The real secret sauce is how do you get the funding on top of all of this to be able to fund something that is not intrinsically recyclable. And that's, effectively what we do all our work on. But it is limited by, and you'll see the equation, I'll put it back up so you can just do a refresh. It is intrinsically limited by how much value we're able to get to the funder, right? We've been able to, for example, scale up coffee capsule recycling to massive rates. Like we run Nespresso's program in some countries, and there we collect, like in Canada, 30% of what they produce back. But that's because it has become their number one tool for consumer retention, and they're willing to invest in it because there's no law that's forcing them to. Right. And I think, so what are the things that we can really center on to bring these solutions, to solve for this? We have to realize that we vote for this all day long by buying things. And, this is where it starts and stops, is what we shop for, because more of what we buy will appear and more of what we don't buy will disappear. Then from there, it's, we need to infuse money into the system, either by purchasing products that are intrinsically valuable enough to go around, or forcing the funding of those things. And the forcing of funding is easier in rich countries and extremely difficult in emerging countries like Indonesia and so on. So I'm sorry I don't have a silver bullet, but at least I can paint you how the chess pieces move.
Yeah, Matthew. Howdy, Tom. My name is Matthew. In the US, are you working with any individual states that are implementing policies to incentivize the reuse and upcycle, similar to what the William Peel whiskey was doing? And
yeah, it's a good question. We are not just in the US, but in other countries too, Canada and others, working with lawmakers as subject matter experts to try to advise them on what type of regulation to bring in to echo the success that we've seen in France. And those two regulations in specific are reuse must be mandated. Like there's a law in France called the EJEC law that says a supermarket must dedicate 10% of its floor space to reusable offerings by 2027. And there is major subsidy where the extended producer responsibility organizations, this is like the packaging tax administrators in the country, must dedicate 5% of their funding per annum to fund reuse, which is the tune of like 100 million euro a year all the way till 2029, which is quite substantial. That's the carrot and the stick. Now, in the US today, there is no city, state, and certainly not federal that has enacted any regulation that can achieve those two things. So we're not actively, live anywhere because those are the requirements that we've learned. We are, though, actively advising and hoping it will come out. I have some excitement that in California, there might be regulation. Senate Bill 54 in California is a that is flirting with this. But it's got to be a state as big as California, which really can bully, the whole country. The problem if a little state does it, like a Vermont or an Oregon, it is not big enough to be able to create what is needed to really, do something like what you see pictured here, where hundreds of consumer product companies start enabling reusable offerings, right? Instead, what you're going to see is aggressive lobbying to kill it, which is more what we see today.
Thank you.
Hi, Tom. Thank you for being here. Quick question. You're talking about closed loop and closed loop products. When it comes to deconstruction, is the process for the closed loop different from another product that is closed that can only be reconstructed into itself? And if it is, how so?
It's an excellent question. So you're comparing, just to refresh, this would be a closed loop, where this shoe has to go into this shoe, or this is open closed loop where any pen can go into this pen, just to refresh for the class, right? So the difference is not, and this is the exciting part, it's not in the anything to do with the recycling process, right? The process overall to deconstruct and make into new materials is, would be the same if I collected here any pen and made it into this pen, or only collected this pen and made it into the pen. The difference is entirely in how the finished object is designed. So this pen is designed to be able to be made from any pen, while this shoe was designed only to be able to be made from this shoe, right? And so one would ask, like, why was it like that? And the reason is that we intrinsically, all foundational design starts from designing from a virgin mentality. That is how, like, all designers function, right? Generally speaking. And I'm making big generalizations here. So guys, please note, there's always going to be an exception here or there, but I'm just saying, and working with like every consumer product company out there, this is how generally it's done, is they design products from a virgin point of view. And if you start with a virgin point of view, then you're going to restrict yourself when you suddenly want to start using waste as the input. If you instead start from a waste mentality, like here Pilot did that and said, we want to be able to use any pen to make a pen, then you can move into open closed loop, which is the only really good way to do closed loop. Now, both of these should be applauded, but I wanted to highlight for you the difference between open closed and closed loop, noting that closed loop is very rare, period, right? Like the only real closed loop systems today are beverage containers, right? It is not a common thing to see an object made back into itself once it hits its end of life.
Thank you.
Hi, Tom. My name is Sarah. So I really like how you become the trailblazer in the industry. Like you're building the e-commerce just to show the brands about how the A/B testing will work in the real field. But I'm curious about your current strategic position. Are you gonna continue with the strategic partnership for the brands in order to make sure that more brands adopting your position, or are you gonna introduce the new product from the specific waste, for example, focusing on just specific on organic waste? I'm just curious, what is the future of TerraCycle and Loops?
Yeah, it's a good question. So let's, the way you should look at the business now is recycling. When we collect and recycle, just to put an image up so we're on the same page, let's say collect and recycle cigarette butts. This is the majority of our revenue today, and this is what funds reuse, right? Reuse is the minority, and it's a big investment for us, but effectively recycling is funding what we see as the future being reuse. So in the short term, we see the recycling business continuing to grow, both organically and inorganically. We've done a number of acquisitions, bought 3 different companies. We plan on, doing more of that. And this is growing. I'm showing you a lot of B2C examples because the visuals are nicer, but half of what we do is B2B, which is facility waste and waste that's behind the scenes that you may not even be aware of, right? Waste from hospitals, waste from factories, waste from laboratories. B2B would look something like this, a little less exciting. This is people recycling filtration devices in a laboratory, just not as sexy as credit card recycling, for example, at least in my opinion. That's why you see more images of the B2C in this presentation. So that is sort of what really fuels the ability for us to invest into reuse. And we really believe reuse is the future in our soul. It's also way more exciting, to me in waste management, because think about it, traditional waste management, where you simply bury or burn, that is giving the least value to waste. It is just saying, get rid of this shit as cheaply as you can. I don't want to see it anymore, right? In recycling, at least you say, hey, I'm going to make something out of that raw material. So again, it's an elevated almost by an order of magnitude. Why we're so passionate about reuse is because in reuse, waste management is not waste anymore. Literally, we become, when this goes, let me show you a different example. When, like, let's say, this product goes around and is cleaned, we are the package supplier. It's much more ingrained into the main artery of business, and waste as a concept isn't there. So that's where we want to go, but it is a long journey. It's been a massive investment. We will continue to do that, but in the short term, it's recycling funds this. But where we see the future in the end is hopefully shifting to a significantly more reusable ecosystem. It's just incredibly uphill.
Hey, Tom, how are you here? Can you speak to the mechanics of taking the containers you received through Loop and preparing them for usage again?
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
For the Haagen-Dazs example, you might have some people who choose to wash it out on its own. You're gonna have other people that leave a little bit of residue. You're gonna have others that eat a couple spoonfuls, decide they don't like the flavor, and then just throw everything away.
Sure. And you're going to have someone who put a piece of shit into it, or drugs, and maybe someone put,
Decide to put the plastic Coca-Cola bottle in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you see my point. Like, don't even be so gentle. Like, there's just going to be a little bit of listeria. There's going to be, like, major, who the fuck knows, right? Yeah. So to answer your question, basically the consumer journey looks something like this. Like, you are presented with a shelf. Here's a convenience store, and let's say, like the gentleman here, you buy wine and Nutella. You pay a deposit. The deposit is, this is a trick to this, is always a little greater than the cost of what the package is. So if the package is 40 cents, we recommend the deposit be 50 cents, right? That way, if the package is not returned, and we have about a 90% return rate, which means 1 in 10 are not, the loss is actually a profit center. That's a healthier than it being a loss center, right? So then the consumer drops it off in one of our bins. Let me see if I can show you a photo of a bin here. They look something like that. You can see different versions of bins. We have dumb bins, smart bins. You can return to the, to the customer service desk. You have to have lots of flexibility in how you return. Interesting insight here is we give people reusable garbage bags. So instead of returning one bottle at a time, you can throw them all into a loop bag and just throw the whole bag in the bin, because our dream is to make reuse feel like disposability, right? That's the key. Make it invisible in behavior, not behavior change. Behavior change is epically difficult, right? So don't change the behavior. Make it feel disposable. Then from there, it goes to a sorting center. And my apology, I don't have a photo of a sorting center, but imagine like a food grade sorting center where it's sorted out down to the product level. And in some cases, even down to the flavor level, right? Then from there, when it's sorted, it goes to specialized cleaning. And this is incredibly advanced cleaning because of the joke we had earlier. Why Nestle had us begin with ice cream is they said this is the technically most difficult product. It is dairy with allergens, like nuts and things, right? So it had to be cleaned at like the most insane. I mean, the clean rooms are, sorry, the cleaning centers are in like grade 3 clean rooms and all this. It is, now it's different by product, right? If you're cleaning cat litter, you don't have to have as high a standard as if you're cleaning baby food. This was the hardest for us because companies have a thing called the hierarchy of death. So just the liability payout if you kill a customer. Turns out the lowest would be a cat. Dogs are bigger payouts than cats, turns out. They're more loved, I guess. Then it's adults, and of course, the older you are, the lower the payout. And the worst thing to kill is a baby. That's when you destroy your business, right? That's the highest payout. So baby food was the biggest thing to get through. This is now baby food in fully reusable containers going around, no problem. But you have this, that's the big lift from a technical health and safety point of view, is the standards of cleaning. And we did a huge amount of work on satisfying companies that we could do this, with safety and do it, in a way that you're not jeopardizing anybody. But that's the biggest component of the back-end supply chain, is the cleaning apparatus.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for being here. I have to ask about the dirty diapers. I feel like you're talking a lot about things that can be made into reusable packaging, but I feel like the dirty diapers are something that's going to be something that's very difficult to get into a reusable. Like, people aren't going to do reusable diapers anymore. It's so
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, so there are two things we do with diapers. What I put up is diaper recycling. So here you put in a dirty disposable diaper, and then it gets recycled. And it gets recycled by, we sterilize it through gamma radiation. That's the same radiation any meat would go through in a developed country to kill pathogens. Then from there it gets shredded, and all the different things that make up a diaper, from the cellulosic material to the polypropylene on the shell, those all go to go to new applications. That's diaper recycling. We did run a national reusable diaper platform with Procter and Gamble and Loop, where basically you would get delivered cloth diapers to anywhere in the country. Then you use them, and then you put the dirty cloth diapers back in the bin. That gets picked up, it's laundered, and sent back to you, or sent back to a different person. But again, because of the regulatory environment in the US, we couldn't get it out of pilot. But we did launch it for a while. It was called reusableddiaper.com was the website at the time. So we did do that. What we found, it's interesting, is that even if we provide, if we pick up the cloth diapers, and we provide a bin for you to put them into, consumers still love the convenience of the disposable one. And that was like, it was working, but that's the biggest thing we still have to figure out. But we might relaunch that in Europe with the right regs now behind us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Question.
I have a question.
Yes.
Tom,
Yeah.
thanks so much for being here. How can we get involved? Can you dive into a little bit about your kind of anything waste boxes and best ways to engage with the loop system?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me show you what you guys can do. I'll do a little plug here. So if you go to TerraCycle.com, is my screen coming through for you guys on the website?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So one is, if you go to recycling, first check out all the free services. There's hundreds and hundreds of free programs that you can sign up for your dorm, for your home, for your, laboratory, for your school, for your class, whatever, stakeholder group. And, everything is free. You just collect the waste, we pick it up, we get it recycled. It's funded by some other stakeholder, like a consumer product brand. And you can even raise money for any school or charity of your choice. And we've raised, I think, around $50 million in donations around the free program. So that's one way, and a very easy way, costs nothing. You could also buy services from us. There's the paid services you can see here for recycling, where you could buy recycling solutions. It's the same exact idea as the free one, except there's no one funding it. That's why we ask you to pay for it. If you want to learn about reuse, you can click on Reuse with Loop. Again, please note, this is really working well in France, but is not today alive in the US due to the regulatory environment. We also, have about 500 jobs in the globally. So we're always looking to hire. We've hired a lot of folks out of Cornell. There's internships available as well that you can check out in the career section of our website. And we've had a lot of really good folks from Cornell, undergrad and grad, come through our intern program, and some of them have taken jobs with us. That's another option. But those would be some opening ideas of how you could potentially interact with us.
Breathe one more question out of you guys. You could do it. Show them you deserve that job or internship.
There you
go. Do you think you're the most knowledgeable person in the world about this topic, about waste?
Am I the most knowledgeable? I don't know. I'm very fascinated by it, but I wouldn't know if I'm the most or not. I do.
I'm turning that question around a little bit. Saying, what other resources would you recommend people look at if they're interested in this space?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I think here's maybe the biggest advice, and I'm not going to say like read this book, because you guys are going to know some of the good books like Cradle to Cradle and so on and so forth. But maybe I can close with what has been for me the most enlightening thing to think about in anything to do with circular economy. What everyone's going to tell you about in circular economy is that it has to do with inventing a new mousetrap, that like through technology, we can technology our way out of it, whether it's chemical recycling or compostability or some cool new whatever, sort of thing. Like we're going to suddenly invent a way to sort for very little through AI, or suddenly we're going to invent some really cool way to valorize materials. And you're going to hear this constantly in the circular economy space. The biggest realization I can tell you is that that's not the driver. The driver is the inherent economics in the object. And that is it, right? Think about it. If you see some money littered on the floor, Are you going to bend over for a penny? Are you going to bend over for a dollar bill? Or are you going to bend over for a $10 bill and pick it up? There's some money at moment that you are going to pick it up, and there's anything below that you won't. And it's only because of the intrinsic value in that, you know, particular item. And that is the absolute everything and the only thing, right? And if you center on that, suddenly it'll demystify any solution that is, put in front of you, right? Just think about the intrinsic economics. So that's the only thing that fuels circularity. And that is all. And that to me has been the biggest unlocking thing that I've realized in 25 years of doing this.
We got one more question. Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you describe the room you're in?
Oh, so I love my personal, you know, sort of passion is any space I'm in, I love to create, you know, the most fun, visual, magical environment. So our offices, if you have a chance, Google TerraCycle offices and you'll see what our offices look like, where every detail is made from garbage. My home, I just, you know, every space is designed, you know, my wife and I build these spaces. This one, I'll just show you. Hold on, let me, I have to unplug a little bit for you guys to see it. But let me turn off the screen.
So we can really take it all in.
Yeah, so this is like a room that we designed that is, imagine if you met a wizard in his library at night. That's sort of the vibe of this room. But every sort of space we make, I mean, why not live in magic, right? And create whatever you want. I think that's the best part of being a grown-up and having capability and resources, right? Is, you know, and that I would recommend doing your work, doing your personal life, right? Don't live in a boring gray life.
That is a great point.
Thank you, guys.
Nice.